The health crisis unleashed by the coronavirus has led to an unprecedented situation. For the first time, multiple offices, factories, cities, and virtually entire countries have closed. During the first half of 2020, we have faced an unimaginable scenario. Think about it for a minute. If in December, someone had told us that during this year, we would see the collapse of the aviation sector, the collapse of oil prices, the wide-scale closure of factories, or the multiple declarations of states of alarm and states of exception throughout the world, we would have said something like, come on, where's the hidden camera? However, as has happened so many other times before, reality ends up being stranger than fiction. Of course, we don't yet know the full extent of the economic crisis that may occur. Closing the doors of entire countries doesn't exactly come cheap. To try to prevent things from getting out of hand, virtually every government in the world is approving plans of all kinds. If you only consider the approved stimulus in public spending, loans, and interventions by central banks, the bill already amounts to trillions of dollars.
$1 trillion. So you're talking about a $6.2 trillion bill.
This is about all of us, and it is way bigger than any of us. This is Europe's moment.
We have been conducting purchases under our new Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, PEP, which has an overall envelope of 750 billion euros.
The European Central Bank pulls out its bazooka and breaks all asset purchase records in a week. The Senate unanimously approves the largest economic bailout in US history of $2.2 trillion to deal with the coronavirus. El País. European Commission proposes recovery plan of 750 billion euros. El Mundo.
And right at this point is when many economists, scientists, and politicians and entrepreneurs have put forward a very particular idea. Why not take advantage of all these plans to drive new non-polluting technologies? Have you heard of green recovery? All this has made us ask ourselves a question at VisualPolitik. Does this really make sense? Can governments boost economic activity while making a big leap towards a greener economy? Would this plan end up being profitable? And friends, one important detail. It doesn't matter if you care more or less about climate change, or if you consider it more or less dangerous, because I'm sure everyone, absolutely all of us, want a cleaner world, a greener world, one in which we are more considerate of other creatures and that is much less polluted. And if on the way to achieving this end goal, we also manage to boost prosperity, the number of jobs and economic growth, then who on earth is not going to stand for this change? But in order to achieve this, we have to keep a few things very clear. The fight against pollution will only be possible if we can make it profitable. And make no mistake, having to be economically profitable is a noble goal as well. It means achieving a better world while allowing people to live better too. Of course, the question is this actually possible? Listen up.
A different recovery.
Today, the European Union is the institution that is investing the most resources in combating climate change. For example, the so-called European Green Pact was introduced in December 2019, an action plan that aims to make Europe the first carbon-neutral continent by 2050. That is, in net terms, it will not emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That eventually, European emissions are lower than the CO2 that is withdrawn naturally from it by plants. Of course, it is not an easy task, and it's not cheap. The European Commission itself has estimated the investment needed to achieve that objective at more than 250 billion euros per year, something like the complete GDP of Finland or the Czech Republic. And now, after the coronavirus crisis, the European Commission wants to speed things up. On the 27th of May, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented a fund for economic reconstruction, totaling 750 billion euros. That's just over $830 billion.
The Commission is today proposing a new recovery instrument called Next Generation EU, worth 750 billion euro.
Money which had been set aside for the Commission's political priorities, the most important among them, the European Green Pact, that is, the fight against climate change. In this way, the European Commission joins a strategy known as Green Recovery. And in this video, we are not going to discuss the Commission's plan because it still lacks many details. And besides, well, you know what these kind of plans tend to rely too much on regulations, public spending, and the capacity of bureaucrats. So beyond how the European plan might work, this time, here on VisualPolitik, we will take a close look at a few examples in this whole green recovery adventure and how it could make sense depending on the approach used. Are you ready? Well, for starters, the first thing is to be clear, very clear about the three key objectives that these kind of strategies have to follow. First, they need to improve the efficiency with which we use energy. Second, they have to be able to drive cleaner ways to produce that energy. That means not only in the richest countries, but also in developing countries. And third, they have to encourage the development of new technologies that allow us to achieve the challenge of becoming carbon neutral, all whilst being cost effective and contributing to the improvement of our lives. Well, with these ideas clearly in mind, let's start this journey. Do you want to see in a concrete way how green recovery can contribute to the economic recovery? Well, let's get started.
Little big changes.
The first thing we can do is take a look at our cities. You see, when we think of carbon dioxide emissions, we usually imagine huge factories with large chimneys pouring out lots of smoke morning, afternoon, and night. However, according to data from the European Union and the United Nations Environment Programme, the buildings, taken into account the construction, maintenance, and above all, the energy and electricity they consume, they account for almost 40%. Yes, 40% of all carbon dioxide emissions in the world. Surprised? Well, friends, let's take a look at one of the most iconic buildings on the planet, the most famous skyscraper in New York City. In 2009, the owners of the Empire State Building decided to carry out a comprehensive reform to reduce the energy consumption of this old giant. A reform that was done, and this is important, not only with the aim of reducing its carbon footprint, but also, and perhaps above all, to reduce electricity and heating bills. It turns out that this reform consisted of things as spectacular as changing the window panes to special ones with greater insulation, changing the lights of the facade to LED lights, putting reflective barriers behind the radiators, assembling a shutter management system, and installing motors in the lifts that allow them to generate energy as they move. Do you think that sounds trivial? Well, pay attention to these numbers. In total, the works amounted to an investment of $31 million and have managed to reduce the emissions of this building by 40%. But do you know what this means in economic terms? Well, it works out to a supply saving of more than $4 million each year. $4 million saving for an investment of just over $30 million? This represents a return of 14%. And if we also take into account the financing, then we find that the profitability of the project for the owners and tenants can easily exceed a return of 20% per year. I'm sure you don't think that is so trivial now. Well, neither do the owners of the Empire State Building. To give you an idea, New York City Council has calculated that if this intervention were extended to the city's other major buildings, that would be the equivalent of taking more than 1.3 million vehicles off the road, while saving hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So why continue to waste energy and money? But anyway, let's go a little bit further. For the next example, we're going to travel to India, one of the poorest countries in the world. Between 2014 and 2018, the size of the LED bulb market in this country multiplied by 130. In 2014, 5 million LED bulbs were sold a year, and that had jumped to more than 670 million just 4 years later. And yes, just as we were asking about the Empire State Empire case, a priori, we may find this change trivial too, at least until we start taking a look at the numbers. Replacing traditional LED light bulbs in India has saved more than 30 terawatt hours, the equivalent of all electricity consumption in a country like Denmark for an entire year. And that's in a country where 75% of electricity is generated by coal, which means that simple switch to LEDs has eliminated a lot of CO2 emissions. And that wasn't the only benefit. LED bulbs consume up to 75% less than traditional bulbs. Therefore, we're talking about enormous savings for many of India's poorest families. Families who, thanks to these savings, have seen their purchasing power grow. Again, why keep wasting energy and money? Well, friends, there are just two examples among many. Best of all, these kinds of policies could be carried out without having to increase public spending. How can that be? For For example, instead of handing out subsidies, something many politicians are far too used to doing, you can reduce consumption taxes on products with a lower environmental impact, such as electric cars. Or you could also extend financing lines on preferential terms, or boost so-called green bonds. Green bonds are debt securities that companies or institutions issue to carry out environmentally responsible projects. One way to boost them would be, for example, to improve the taxation conditions for private investors, something that is already partially happening in countries like the United States. That is, if you invest your money in financing green projects, then you pay less tax on the profits you make. Makes sense, doesn't it? This could drive economic recovery, reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and save hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that are currently used completely unproductively. This is exactly what green recovery is. But wait a minute, because it doesn't end here.
New strategies for new times.
The second goal we need in this entire strategy is to promote cleaner ways of obtaining energy. And do you know what? We have some good news here too. According to data from the Lazard Investment Bank, over the past decade, wind energy costs have fallen by 69%, and the costs of solar energy even more, by about 88%. In other words, thanks to technological advancement, these energy sources are 3 to 8 times cheaper than just 10 years ago. You may find it surprising, but in many cases, wind and solar energy are already fully competitive in the market. In fact, this explains why, for example, a place like Texas, the Mecca, the epicenter, the heart of America's oil and gas industry, is already the leading US state with the highest installed wind capacity, and is soon to be the second in solar energy. To give you an idea, in the United States alone, there are already more than 3 million green energy related jobs. Friends, we're talking about a paradigm shift that, along with the closure of dirty coal mining plants that have caused CO2 emissions to fall, even though the US economy has continued to grow in recent years. And since technological advancement in this field doesn't stop, from the land we move on to the oceans. Take, for example, this Iberdrola project, the East Anglia one in the North Sea, the largest initiative of a Spanish company in the history of renewables, and one that will become one of the largest offshore wind farms on the planet. We are talking about a macro project that in total will involve an investment of more than 7.5 billion euros for a capacity of 3,100 MW. A project that already today, in its first phase, is generating more than 1,300 jobs and has taken a huge leap in the technological learning curve. But we need to look at the big picture, because the problem of carbon dioxide emissions is a global one, not just something that happens in developed countries. That is, if we really want to achieve a cleaner world, we have to find solutions for developing countries as well. In this way, we could take advantage of the crisis to promote the transition from dirty energies like coal to cleaner ones. And I'm not talking about renewable energies, but also, for example, liquefied natural gas. Today, this gas is cheaper than coal, and although it is still a fossil fuel, it is much cleaner. Think of coal as producing almost half of all CO2 emissions in the world. In fact, according to data from the International Energy Agency, if we simply replaced coal with other fossil fuels, such as natural gas, our total global emissions would be reduced by almost 25%. I mean, we could have the same energy, but much cheaper and cleaner. To achieve this, governments in the most developed countries could promote private funds that pilot and finance this entire transition. It would be a good thing for everyone. Then, along with the benefits of green bonds or financing programs, the substitution of conventional taxes, such as corporation tax or part of VAT for new taxes linked to environmental impact, could be considered. These are taxes that already work with relatively good results in some countries such as Canada. In other words, make those who pollute pay and reward those who strive not to pollute. It makes complete sense. On one hand, this change would allow negative externalities to be taxed, such as the damage from pollution, and on the other hand, it would promote investment in competitive clean technologies. And after all, that's what we want, isn't it? And there's even more. All these kind of changes would also drive research and development of even newer and more exciting technologies such as hydrogen or carbon capture, among many others. Something that would ultimately allow us to make a new leap in prosperity, standard of living, and environmental care. In this way, even governments could participate in venture capital funds led by private investors. It's something that we talked about a long time ago, and it's exactly what Israel did to become one of the most innovative countries in the world and experience an economic boom. Anyway, so as you can see, there are a lot of possibilities which indicate green recovery not only makes sense, but could also be quite an opportunity. An opportunity to face the crisis, become more competitive, reach higher levels of prosperity, and achieve a greener world. With the figures we've seen, it seems something that's perfectly possible to achieve. Of course, it is not clear, not at all clear, that these are the kinds of policies that the politicians who, for example, are leading the European Union have in mind. That's why here on this channel, we wanted to put on the table some alternatives which might be good for everyone. But having said that, it's your turn. What do you think of green recovery? Do you think our government should move in that direction? What do you think is the best formula for dealing with this crisis? Leave your answer in the comments. So, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, this channel was possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.